Hello and welcome, friends. I hope everybody's having a great day so far. If you are new here, welcome. And if you're back, welcome back. I greatly appreciate all of the ongoing support. This is my channel, Dragonsjewel Creative Gems, and I'm Tegan, and I'm just going to get all that wonderful YouTubey stuff out of the way first. If you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, please consider doing so. It's just down below there. And of course, any love, comments, suggestions, all those wonderful things, there's that comment section down there. And don't forget to hit that like button as well. Today we are going to be doing our Ghostly Echoes series, and we had been going through the province of Alberta. I have now finished up Alberta, and we are moving west to British Columbia, also known as BC. So those will be the next series of ghost stories that we'll be covering starting this episode. We'll see how far we get with those, and I hope you guys enjoy these next few spooky tales. Ogopogo and other water monsters. A palindrome is a word or phrase that reads the same backward or forward. Such word games are at best fun and challenging. At worst, they're uninteresting and frustrating. It's difficult, though, to imagine being afraid of a palindrome, unless it happens to be the name of Canada's best-known water monster, Ogopogo, and you suddenly find yourself face to face with it. Imagine that it's the summer of 1977, and you are a youngster, part of a group enjoying a perfect summer day at extraordinarily beautiful Okanagan Lake. Someone suggests water skiing. You don't even think of saying no. You wait patiently until it's your turn to don the skis. Despite your best efforts to brace them, your legs quake a bit as the tow rope behind you and the boat tightens. The shakiness comes partially from excitement and anticipation of the adventure ahead, partly from the momentary challenge of standing up. Then you're upright and enjoying the strange sense of freedom that comes with water skiing. It's strange because you're most assuredly not free at all. You are tethered to a powerful boat. However, if it were not for that tether and the physics entailed in how it affects your motion, you would not be enjoying that exhilarating, if deceptive, feeling of freedom. Once you have the feel of skis, the water, the rope, the boat, and its operator's style, that bit of tension that you felt begins to melt away. You relax, cutting in and out of the wake. The stream lifts you up ever so briefly before your skis slap down hard on the water's surface. Any worries that you might have had before getting out there in the middle of Okanagan Lake are washed away by the drops of water being sprayed against your body. Suddenly your eyes fall on something in the water, something that isn't supposed to really exist. There, not 1 meter, 3 feet from you, is a huge, ugly creature, staring directly into your eyes. Your concentration instantly shattered, you drop the line that would have pulled you away from the frightful beast. You land in the water in the middle of a lake that some people say is bottomless, right beside what you always thought was a mythical water monster. Your subconscious reflexes intended to preserve your well-being kicked in and you faint. But because you're in the water, the faint becomes life-threatening rather than life-preserving. The story above many sound like an imaginative anecdote, but it recounts exactly what happened to Aaron Neely on July 2nd, 1977. Fortunately, the tale has a happy ending. The ski boat's operator maneuvered his craft skillfully and quickly enough to save Aaron's young life. According to an article in a November 1978 edition of the Smithsonian Magazine, the terrifying incident put Aaron in the unusual, but perhaps not enviable position of being only one of 2 people to experience Ogopogo up close and personal, and live to tell of it. Non-native exposure to the monster, said to inhabit Okanagan Lake, began in the late 1850s, when pioneers began settling in south-central British Columbia. The First Nations people made it a point to warn the newcomers of the strange danger lurking in the deep waters of the long, narrow lake that would come to be known as Okanagan Lake. No native would be foolish enough to attempt to cross the lake without loading at least one small animal, often a pig or dog, into his canoe. That way, at the first sign of the dreaded monster's approach, usually indicated by turbulence in the water, he could throw the animal overboard as a sacrifice to temporarily appease the monster of the lake. Nahatik. I have chosen to use the Salish spelling because it is one of the most common one of the 8 or more that exist. Initially, the settlers around the lake scoffed at the tales of the First Nations people. They found such stories to be whimsical and inventive. Certainly not anything to be taken seriously. It wasn't until the mid-1860s that the potential danger involved in crossing the lake became apparent to the burgeoning community of pioneers. John McDougall, a man whose parents represented both the Aboriginal and immigrant communities, gambled with the myth and lost. He set out to lead his horses across the Narrows. Paddling a canoe, McDougall started his horses swimming. For unrecorded reasons, he did not bring the standard precautionary sacrifice. Well before he made it to the safety of the opposite shore, an unseen force pulled McDougall's animals under. They were never seen again. By the mid-1870s, immigrants were paying considerably more attention to the First Natives' perspective. 2 of the most respected settlers, Susan Allison and Thomas Smithram, had actually seen the monster. The 2 were not together at the time, and yet their sightings were made on the same day, but from the opposite shores of the lake. Their descriptions of the monster were identical. Miss Allison, who was well aware of the legend of the lake monster, was watching her husband and son to return from a nearby mission. She stood at the edge of the bluff on her family's ranch property overlooking West Bank across the lake from Kelowna. The storm that had swept through the area over the previous night had abated, all but the strong northerly winds that continued to blow along the length of the lake. At some point, what appeared to be a large log on the lake caught her eye. Her initial reaction may have been some concern for the potential danger that the log might present to anyone on the lake in a small craft. If so, that concern was no doubt increased when she saw the huge log begin to move, to swim across the current, whipped up by the winds. When Susan Allison saw that movement, her skeptical attitude towards the tale of Nahatik, the water monster, were no doubt altered forever. She realized that what she'd seen was indeed a giant reptile, and from that day on, the story of the monster in the lake was accepted as a cross-cultural one. Roughly 25 years later, a 10-year-old girl playing on a beach at Okanagan Landing, near Vernon, unwittingly entered into a short but intense visual exchange with the monster. The child Ruth Richardson saw the creature staring at her. Then she watched as it submerged, only to reappear seconds later, much closer to the spot where she knelt. Momentarily transfixed in her terror, Ruth fled as soon as she could force her legs to obey the orders issued by her brain. The encounter so terrified Ruth Richardson that when, as an adult, she returned to the spot where she'd seen the water monster, she reportedly turned down all invitations to go out on the lake in a boat. Richardson was quoted at that time as saying that she would not venture out into those waters for any money. There is clearly no doubt in the woman's mind that the stories of the huge beast beneath the waves of Okanagan Lake were all too real. And so the settlers, aware of the existence of the potentially dangerous beast, began to increase. Sailors aboard vessels that pilled the lake's waters often reported catching glimpses of the mysterious being. The authorities formed hunting parties to rid the lake of the creature whose existence they had once disbelieved. Interestingly, some 20 years after those unsuccessful assassination plots were being developed, the enemy was given the cute name of Ogopogo, which is still in use. The appellation is believed to have originated in a parody of the words in an Old English music hall tune. The revised rhyme indicated that his mother was an earwig, his father was a whale. Since the creature's appearance so defied any plausible attempt at identifying its true ancestry, the mention of earwigs and whales succeeded in bringing the animal into a more familiar realm. Ogopogo has gone from being treated as a dreaded beast that has been appeased by living offerings of small sacrificial animals to being depicted as an appealing and even lovable cartoon character sort of monster. If it exists, and there have been enough sightings to suggest that it does, Ogopogo is probably neither. Most often witnesses describe seeing a snake-like creature anywhere from 3.5 to 21 meters, 11 to 70 feet in length. It is usually described as having humps and being either black or very dark green. We do know that it travels very quickly in the water, but there is uncertainty as to how it propels itself. Its head is sometimes said to resemble a goat's, and at other times a dog's, or more fittingly, given the description of its body, a snake's. So if our opinions have changed that drastically, does that mean we've learned more about the beast, which is reputed to live in an underwater cave near Squally Point in Okanagan Lake? Unfortunately, not significantly, theories explaining or refuting the existence of the creature are as controversial now as they ever were. There have been enough reports from reliable witnesses over the years to conclude that at least one unusual large creature in Okanagan Lake. And although Ogopogo is usually each referred to as a single entity, it is highly unlikely that there was only one such creature. Reliable witnesses have reported seeing more than one of the strange creatures at the same time in the lake. Ogopogo is no longer suspected of being some kind of freshwater manatee because it is too big and moves too quickly to be a member of that group. One school of thought maintains that people think they see one animal, but they are actually observing a number of large sturgeons swimming in a line. Proponents of that theory like to remind people that sturgeon in British Columbia have apparently reached lengths of 4 meters, 13 feet, and weighs 400 kilograms, 880 pounds. Is Ogopogo a throwback? A historic land animal that, in order to preserve itself, adapted to living in the water? Evidence in the form of enormous footprints on land has been found to support that theory. Descriptions of Ogopogo and its supposed cousin Nessie, the monster in Scotland's Loch Ness, suggest a resemblance to the long-extinct plesiosaurs, or they may be sea serpents that have become landlocked and are able to survive and even thrive on the plentiful supply of food in the lake, and that they mostly escape detection by hiding in submerged crevices and caves. Given that the Ogopogo's home, Okanagan Lake, is 170 kilometers, 105 miles long, and over 300 meters, 980 feet deep in places, there is certainly plenty of space for any and all of these theories to take hold and grow. All these theories have both their supporters and their detractors. The giant sturgeon hypothesis can be quickly deflated with the knowledge that sturgeon are bottom feeders who rarely come up from the depths. The assumption that the animal does not really exist, but is the result of either creative imaginations or optical illusions, is defeated by the photographs that exist of the beast. Most scientists are skeptical nonetheless. However, in his paper, The Population Density of Monsters in Loch Ness, British Columbia's Dr. Stephen Kerr maintained that at a time when physicists worked with quarks and black holes, and attributed properties such as charm and strangeness to subatomic particles, I would not be surprised at anything. Maybe not, but on July 29, 1962, the 30 people attending a church picnic were certainly surprised to see an enormous snake-like creature that moved through the water like a caterpillar. And what of the rotting carcass found back in 1914 on Rattlesnake Island. The island lies near Squally Point, where it is literally believed Ogopogo's underwater cave is located. The find gave people their first opportunity to view and examine the monster in detail and safety. F.R. Buckland, a member of the party that made the find, described the gargantuan body as being blue-gray in color, sparsely covered with hair, having a flat tail, no visible neck or ears, and a stubby nose protruding from a rounded head. The animal's appendages were flippers equipped with claws. Portion of the enormous skeleton found that day were displayed to the public. Not surprisingly, the exhibition drew interested folks from all over. After all, it's not every day that a person has the opportunity to gaze upon shoulder bones 2 meters, 6.5 feet in breadth, along with tusks and claws that were taken from a corpse that was estimated to weigh in excess of 180 kilograms, 400 pounds. To muddy the waters of investigation even further, it must be recognized that the Ogopogo is not the only water monster in Canada. Far from it, these creatures, identified swimming objects, USOs, as they are sometimes called, can be found in other provinces as well. A heritage painting held by the New Brunswick Museum shows 2 people in a canoe as they try desperately to paddle away from an enormous snake-like creature that is pursuing them. A monster sometimes referred to as Manipogo, and at other times Winnipogo, is thought to dwell in the depths of Manitoba's Lake Winnipeg. In the 1800s, there were reports of a monster in Quebec's Lake Pohenamagak. The Turtle Lake monster in Saskatchewan has for years been held responsible for shredding fishing nets. In Ontario, Kempenfelt Kelly makes it home under the surface of Lake Simcoe. We have other less well-known mysterious water-dwelling beasts right here in British Columbia. Human knowledge of these creatures dates back to long before non-natives begin to explore the area. The beasts have been reported in the lore of the First Nations people for centuries. Depictions of dragon-like sea serpents appear among the rock etchings of Petroglyph Park, just south of Nanaimo. In 1881, Frank Stanford, then a boy of 12, armed with a slingshot and a supply of small stones, struck such a monster near there. In 1903, a sighting near Bamfeld Cable Station on the west coast of Vancouver Island at Barkley Sound made national headlines. The article describes the April 14th sighting of a sea serpent from 40 to 60 feet, 12 to 18 meters long, with a head like a horse. Although doubtless startled, the witnesses could not have been entirely surprised by this sighting, for the First Nations people in the area had been telling them of the existence of a sea serpent. The report adds that, with the typical arrogance of settlers, those warnings were disregarded. On this spring day, however, technically, trained men watched the strange creature raise a big horse-like head and swim out from the mouth of Bamfield Creek into Barkley Sound. The witnesses must have been impressed by the speed of the animal's movement, for they reported that it moved off with the speed of a torpedo boat. When word of the sighting spread to the community outside the station, the operators learned that just 4 days previously, local natives had made similar observations. Other monsters have been reported into the waters around Vancouver Island over the last 150 years. During April 1929, in Harrow Strat, near Darcy Island, off Central Saanich, 2 fishermen reported seeing a sea serpent. On the other side of Saanich Peninsula, and just over a decade later, 2 of the people stationed at Patricia Bay, leading aircraftsman C.O. Biscaro and aircraftsman W.F. Hind, will likely never forget that particular posting. In July of 1940, while on the water in a small craft, the 2 men came far too close for comfort to a creature with fins all over its looped body. 9 years later, a pair of water monsters were observed in Swartz Bay, at the northeastern tips of the peninsula. As recently as 1963, Mr. and Mrs. David Wellham of Sattler, about halfway between Duncan and Nanaimo, watched what looked like a giant eel playing in a cove off Stewart Channel. Over the years, there have been sea serpent sightings made from numerous places around Vancouver Island, including Calcon Beach, Camanis, Campbell River, and other locations. These various creatures are often referred to simply as Caddy, because the huge beast has often been seen in Cadborough Bay near the University of Victoria campus. Aside from Ogopogo, Caddy is probably the best known of Canada's USOs. Like Ogopogo, Caddy had a long and rich heritage before settlers arrived in the area. Since then, he has managed to capture the attentions of those relative newcomers. Encounters with Caddy or his cousins were especially frequent in the 1930s. In 1932, Hubert Evans, at the time a well-respected resident of Robert Creek on the Sunshine Coast, and his friend Dick Reeve were looking out over the water toward Vancouver Island. Some 50 years after the fact, he described the sighting succinctly and colorfully as the damnedest thing. The water in Georgia Strat had been as calm as glass, he recalled. Seconds later, the water's surface was broken by a series of bumps, after which a shaft, 2 to 3 meters, 6 to 10 feet tall, protruded just ahead of the bumps. The shaft then turned so that Evans and Reeve were able to see that it was actually a neck with a head at the end. The man recalled that the head, which had clearly defined facial features, was roughly equivalent in size and shape to a horse's. Evans acknowledged that the sighting unnerved the 2 men, declaring it just put the hair up on the back of your neck. Once they had composed themselves significantly, the men looked for a camera. They found one, but there was no film at hand. Though Evans and his companion weren't able to photograph the animal, he did note that someone else must also have seen the strange beast, because the police had been notified and had sent a boat out to observe and record details about the thing. For some time from the day onward, the monster was seen often. Some witnesses were more credible than others, and some cases have therefore become better known than others. An example of an instance that is taken very seriously occurred on October 8, 1933. Major W. H. Langley, a local lawyer who had held the position of clerk of the legislature, and his wife were out in Cadborough Bay on their sailboat early one Sunday afternoon. Major Langley was an experienced sailor who was familiar with marine life after spending many years on whaling ships, and yet, even at close range, he was not able to identify the species of the strange creature in front of them. He did note that it was nearly 30 meters, 100 feet in length, and as wide as an average automobile. Langley reported the experience to the press, who of course ran an article about this high-profile and respected citizen spotting the much-talked-about sea monster. The article prompted a reply from the government employee attesting that he too had recently seen the beast, but has chosen to keep mum in order to avoid public ridicule. Ever since that minor flurry of excitement, the sea monster associated with Cadborough Bay has been affectionately known as Caddy. On December 6, 1938, the tugboat Catalula Chief was in Stewart Channel, roughly 30 kilometers, 20 miles south of Nanaimo, when the captain and crew spotted a serpent looping through the waters that fit the general description of Caddy. The first creature was then joined by a second similar one. The following year, 4 men were heading to Vancouver in a fishing boat when they spotted Caddy. I could clearly see the monster, Victor Johnson, one of the men, told a reporter. Just 2 weeks later, on March 15, 1939, the Vancouver Sun playfully referred to the monster as Mr. Caborosaurus, after it had been spotted off Chemamus. Then early in January 1940, Cecile Burgess and Norman Ingram, 2 Victoria residents, reported being glared at from a distance of some 12 meters, 40 feet, by eyes set in a head that resembled a cross between a camel and a walrus. The body of the animal that they saw was like the Johnsons' sighting, nearly 1 meter, 3 feet thick. Neither of the 2 men or any of the several other witnesses offered an estimate of the animal's overall length. During the last half of April 1950, several residents of Sydney, north of Victoria, including 2 women whose names were recorded as Miss Dan Butler and Miss H. Bradley, reported seeing a serpent-like creature about 35 meters, 115 feet out from the shore. They estimated the animal as being nearly 20 meters, 65 feet in length, having a long, slender neck that was apparently dark brown and just less than 0.5 meters, 1.5 feet in diameter. The neck held up a head that a woman described as peculiar and pointed. Sightings continued and continue to present day, with the summer of 1997 having been especially busy with Caddy sightings. Local newspapers carried reports of credible sightings. In one article, retired cryptozoologist, someone who studies hidden animals, Dr. Ed Bousfield, explained Cabosaurus as a Mesozoic relic. In reference to a sighting by 2 University of Victoria students the following month, Dr. Bousfield started the reptile-like Caddy is probably one of the largest living dinosaurs. His research over the years had indicated that rather than lay eggs as one would expect of a reptile, the females come to shore of shallow estuaries to bear live young. A few pictures exist of the beast, but during the summer of 1951, an American tourist who tried to take Caddy's photograph managed only to get his own version of the classic big one that got away story. It seems that Don McIntyre was visiting Victoria from his home in Los Angeles. On Saturday, July 25th, he rented a boat and headed out to enjoy some time on the waters of Brentwood Bay. As luck would have it, Caddy made one of its unpredictable appearances, and McIntyre was ready with his waterproof camera. The animal raised its head and the photographer snapped a shot. Unfortunately, he became nervous and his camera slipped from his grasp and fell into the depths below. In keeping with the tradition of such sad tales, Don McIntyre assured a reporter from the Vancouver Sun that the photograph that he took would have been a beauty. The monster sighted in Thetis Lake, north of Victoria, during a 3-day period in August 1972, however, was anything but a beauty. From drawings that the frightened witnesses created after their encounter, it closely resembled the monster in the movie Creature from the Black Lagoon. The strange gilman, reported to have emerged from the waters of Thetis Lake, was apparently a bipedal reptile with 6 spikes atop its head. It was also aggressive. As the creature emerged from the water, it spotted the small group of people standing nearby on the shore. Terrified, the people ran. The beast chased after them and was reported to have gotten close enough to cut one man's hand with one of its head spikes. In total, water monsters have been reported in at least 24 British Columbia lakes. Cryptozoologists believe that, with a few exceptions, the creatures in these lakes and in coastal waters generally have one of 2 different appearances. According to local expert Jim Clark, one type, like Ogopogo, has a long neck and a dog-like face. The other type resembles a giant squid, but has a seaweed-colored mane. All of these strange beasts, land dwellers such as the Sasquatch, and water dwellers such as Ogopogo and Caddy, have terrified and fascinated humans for centuries. And yet, interest in the creatures is not waning. Far from it. If anything, investigative approaches have become more serious and intensive. Surprising as it may seem, these creatures are protected by law. It is illegal to harm any of them. By interference, this protection supports the claim that such hidden oddities do actually exist. At this writing, John Kirk, a British Columbia-based expert on Okanagan Lake's monster, is preparing for a thorough on-site exploration of the creature's habitat in the year 2000. He feels some urgency is involved, and he fears that the species may be in danger of becoming extinct. It'll be interesting to note any progress that might be made toward overcoming centuries of fear, considering that in 1938, a South African fishing trawler hauled up the carcass of a coelacanth, a fish that scientists were sure had been extinct for 60 million years. There is reason to believe that we will eventually know the explanation for these supernatural British Columbia enigmas of the aquatic variety. But what about the unidentified flying objects which have been seen over the province since the 19th century, and possibly much earlier?